Well, hey friend, welcome. Really glad you're here. We're going to step into a series. It's a 6-week series where we're just going to study together, just open up God's word and lean into some relationships. And we're just going to process what does it look like to live life in rich community, like the kind of community that God made you for, right? And so here's what I know. Some of you are in a room full of people that you know, and it's great. And you're like, man, I can't wait. This is going to be great. We need this. We need something to kind of pull us out of fake and into real. And then there's some of you, you're like, I don't even know if I like these people, man. And so some of you are on your own right now and you're watching this for the first time and you're trying to figure out if you want to join a group next week. All those things, it could be a million things. Here's what I want you to know. I want you to know that for the next 6 weeks, we are going to unpack the power of living life in community. Now, the series is called Allelon, and some of you may be like, I think that's a misprint. Is it like all alone? No. Allelon is Greek for a phrase that we use, one another. It literally just means one another. It means like this reciprocal thing where we live life with one another. It occurs over 100 times in the New Testament. And approximately 59 of those are specific commands trying to help us figure out how to live life with one another. Over 16 times, it's to love one another. That's probably the most important, right? Be devoted to one another, honor one another, live in harmony with one another, build one another up, be like-minded towards one another, accept one another, admonish one another, care for one another, bear one another's burdens, forgive one another. Be patient with one another. Speak truth and love to one another. Be kind and compassionate. Speak to one another. Submit to one another. Consider others better than yourselves. Look to the interests of one another. Teach one another. Comfort one another. Encourage one another. Exhort one another. Stir up, provoke, stimulate one another to just love and good works. Show hospitality to one another. Pray for one another. Even confess your faults to one another. And there's even some commands in there that are like, so here's the deal. If we're going to do that, then you can't lie to one another. You can't judge one another. You can't keep biting and devouring each other. You're going to destroy each other. Don't be conceited. Don't envy each other. Don't slander each other. Don't grumble against each other. We do all of this because we are in a real sense members of one another. And here's what I want to say to you right now. I don't know if you noticed, that's the kind of list that I kind of want in a best friend, right? I want those things in my life. And the reality is, listen, family, we were made to be together, to live a one another life, to live Allelon. It's not just a list for the Gospels. It didn't want to just give us a list of what you should do. They also gave us an example. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to dive in the next few weeks, and we're just going to say, okay, let's set our hearts on those kinds of real relationships. You and I need Jesus, real, honest, joy-filled, genuine relationships. And so we're going to walk through some of these really hard things, but I also want you to know that we're not going to just give you a list. We're going to talk about some examples. We're going to try to make this practical for you because we can't just see it and long for it. We've got to figure out, that's what we're going to do. We've got to figure out, and then how do we step into this? How do we step into a one another life? So the picture is painted, I think you know this, but in Acts 2:42, right at the birth of the church, it says this, it says, they, meaning a group of people, an Allelon group, a one another group, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. There wasn't a Bible yet, right? The apostles' teaching, to the fellowship, to Allelon, to the breaking of bread, or just making sure that Jesus and the centrality of Jesus' death and resurrection was at the center, and to prayer. They prayed together. Here's what happened. Everyone, verse 43 says, they were filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles, and all the believers were together. Man, they had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. And every day, they just continued to meet together in temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And here's what happened. The Lord just added to their number. Daily, those were being saved. And I just want to say, I think this is true for you and me. We all long for this. Like, we all want real relationships. We all want God to move. Like, we either want him to act, to like just see his power, to watch him heal and restore and direct him to move, or we just need him to, right? We need God to move. We all want to see God break addiction, right? We all want to watch some of our friends who have prodigal kids. We all want to watch those kids come home and find out who they are. We all want to step into purpose. We all want to receive and watch just the power of redemption. We all want to see God heal. We want him to see him transform. We want to see lonely people found in families. And some of us don't just want to see it. Like I said, some of us really need it. I mean, we need his ability to do the impossible, and we want to walk in rich friendships and deep community. And if you're one of those out there that you're like, maybe, I'm just going to say this, you're the one that needs it the most. If you're wondering even if you need this kind of community, I would go so far as to say you might be the one that needs to stick through this the most. So here's what we're going to do. Stick with me. In the next 6 weeks, we're going to just walk through what does it look like? How do I step into a one another, power of one another life, an Allelon life? So here's what we're gonna do. The birth of the church, right? We talked about it in Acts chapter 2. The very next, literally the next day, Acts chapter 3 and verse 1, it's the first story after that. Verse 1, it says this, it says, so one day, Peter and John were going up to the temple at the time of prayer at 3 p.m. And so real fast, I just want you to see this in the text. They had decided to devote themselves to being together, like the power of we. So the two of them decide to go together and they just want to pray together. I was with a guy this last week and he was kind of explaining to me how he had been growing in prayer and how he's just like, man, I just feel like so much of my faith journey I've done on my own. And so I just put on my calendar, like I'm going to pray with this person on Monday. I'm going to pray with this person on Tuesday. I'm going to pray with my wife on Wednesday. And he just said, listen, it's one thing to say I want it. It's another thing to be devoted to that kind of life. And I just right off the bat, I just want you to see the early church had a devotion. They were devoted to the power of one another. So verse 2 says this, it says, now a man who was lame from birth was being carried to the temple, the gate beautiful, where he was put every day to beg from those going into the temple courts. But I just want you to know that word bear, meaning bear one another's words, is Galatians 6:2, it's the exact same word that's used here. Literally, like there's a man in their life, and they knew that for this man to really get what he wanted and get what he needed, he was going to have to be carried to a place where God could show up in his life. So we don't know their names, but all we know is that there's a group of people that have decided that we're going to bear, we're going to carry, we're going to look at the person who's got something going on in their life, and we're going to pick him up, and we're going to carry him literally every day. They carried this guy. They carried him. He couldn't do it on his own. They carried him and sat him at the gates. You know, I was preaching a message at Blankenbaker, and I don't know if you've heard the story of the four men who brought the paralytic. Have you heard this story? And they brought him to Jesus, and they want to get to Jesus because they knew what most of us know. If we could just get him to Jesus, they'd be healed. They'd find life. And so they knew that was true. And so they grab this guy, a group of friends, I'm assuming, they pick him up and they carry him to Jesus. And the whole point of the story was I was trying to tell the story through the eyes of the men who picked him up. It's like we just have to have eyes for people. We got to have a whatever it takes kind of love for people. And, I'm telling this whole story and how we get people to Jesus and how we got to pick them up and how we got to get them there and Jesus can do the impossible. And literally, I went that day, my car had been in a wreck and I went to this body shop and I walked in and I saw, the same person that was at the front desk and we become friends over the years. And she just looked at me with tears in her eyes and she said, hey, just so you know, I came to church this week. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. Like, how, what'd you think? And how'd you go? And she said, if I can be honest, I kind of sat up in the top and I was looking down. She said, can I tell you what I was thinking the whole time? I said, what's that? She said, I wish somebody could just pick me up and get him to him. I just don't know how to do it. I don't know how to get to him. I wish somebody would pick me up. I wish somebody would carry me to the place where Jesus is because I know I need him. And I just want to say this, family. We are the kind of people that lean in and that we see people, that we pick them up and we carry people. We help them carry their burdens and we do whatever it takes to get them to Jesus. Somebody that day grabbed someone in need and said, I don't want you tackling this on your own. I want to help. And they literally picked him up and carried him. We carry people. So verse 3 says this. It says, when he saw Peter and John about to enter, talking about the blind man, he asked him for money. And Peter looked straight at him, as did John. Now don't miss this, right? This guy's here and he's at the place where he can get money, where he can, somehow take care of himself. They're trying to help him out here. And all of a sudden he reaches out and says, hey, here, I have a need. And I don't want you to miss this. Peter and John both just look right at him. They see him. Now listen, there's a lot of people walking that day that didn't see him. I don't know if you've experienced this or not, but when you walk into a downtown or you go to an area you're not familiar with, or there's this increasing growth of people with signs at stoplights, and sometimes there's so much of it, you just stop seeing people. And what I love is that Peter and John, they just saw people. I just want to encourage you, if we're going to become one another people, we're going to have to see people. Jesus saw people. He saw Zacchaeus in that tree. He saw that woman washing his feet that nobody else wanted to look like. He noticed, he felt when he had the older woman touch his cloak, and he said, no, I don't move forward without making sure that I stop, because I know that you matter, that I see you. He did it with Matthew in the text booth. He did it with Mary. I'm just telling you, Jesus had a way of seeing people. If we're going to live one another life, we got to see people. And I just love it. Then Peter just said to him, he said, okay, I'm looking at you. Then Peter said to him, and I love this, he said, look at us. Isn't that funny? The guy's already looking at him, but he says, look at us. And so verse 5 says, so the man gave them his attention, expecting to get something from them. And so I just love this. And again, I just want to pull out this passage. I just love this. Peter looks at him and says, are you like look at us? He's like, I'm already looking. He's like, no, look at us. Here's how I take this. I think Peter saw something in this man's life that even this man couldn't see. This man saw, how do I get through today? Peter looked at him and said, I've got something way better for you. Peter had the ability to see past this impossible situation that was a routine situation that this man had learned how to just live with. And somehow Peter didn't just see him. Peter had eyes of faith. And I just feel like if we're going to have one another life, sometimes I think when people look at us and we look at other people, not only do we need to see them, but we need to really see past their current situation, have eyes for faith of what could be. I've told the story before. I don't know if you've heard it, but when I was little, I grew up in a really hard situation. I won't go through the whole thing, but it was complicated and there was a lot going on. I'll just say it that way. And I remember when for the very first time, I was kind of living in the inner city and my mom was going out to this church in the suburbs, and we go out there, they made a way basically for me to kind of come to this little school at the church. And here I go walking through the door, and I'm this ruddy, ratty inner city street kid, and I walk in, but there was a Mrs. Shaw, kindergarten teacher, who came across the room and lifted my head and looked in my eyes and said to me, young man, are you Matt? And I'm like, yes, ma'am. And she said to me, young man, do you have two different colored eyes? I was like, yes, ma'am. And she said to me, and she spoke into me, hear this. Young man, you've been marked by God. He's going to do great things in your life. You're going to be a great man. And he sent you here for us to pour into. We can't wait to see what God does in your life. That's what it looks like to have eyes of faith. We see with eyes of faith in people's lives. I love 2 Corinthians 4:18. It says this, so we fix our eyes not on what is seen. Everybody else sees your impossible situation, but we focus on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. We have eyes of faith for people. We see past what's going on. That's what this one another thing is. And I love verse 6, it keeps going. It says, then Peter said, silver and gold, listen, man, I don't have silver or gold. If I had it, I'd give it to you. But what I do have, I give you. And in the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, walk. But I don't want you to skip ahead too fast. I want to make sure that we stop for just a second and recognize that Peter didn't give what he didn't have. Peter gave what he had. And I want you to know, we all have the power to give what we have, don't we? I mean, somebody gave that guy a ride or carried him, and someone carried him. Someone gave what they had. They had their time, and they had their arms, and they had their legs, and they brought him that day. Sometimes we have a prayer. Sometimes you have silver and gold and you give it. Sometimes you don't know what to give, but you give what you have. I remember being in the inner city with my daughter, Ava. We were actually there with the whole family, and if you're ever with my Ava girl, she has this thing where if you've got money in your pockets and we're gonna be around, homeless people or something like that, she's gonna be, hey, can I have? Hey, can I have? And she's always asking for money. It's like, hey, we're doing this. Like whatever's in there, we're just gonna give, right? And she's better at that than I am. I'm just being honest. And so the one day was filled with her just giving out all this cash. And I had pulled out a bunch of cash for the trip. But all of a sudden, she's just giving it out and giving it to people. She's like 6 years old. She's tiny. But then all of a sudden, we got to the hotel room that night, and she's like, hey, Dad, do you have any more money for tomorrow? And I'm like, baby, I really don't. Actually, there's not an ATM, and maybe we'll figure that out. And so she kind of disappeared into the other room. And I was like, well, that's what 6-year-olds do, right? And so she's in there on a notepad. She's writing a bunch of letters and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, she's journaling. I don't know what she's doing. She's 6, right? But it was the next day that we went out on the street. And as we walked out on the street, I started noticing her. She had her little journal with her, or this little notepad. And all of a sudden, we come up to this homeless guy, and she takes one sheet, and she rips it off, and she folds it up, and she walks over. And I don't even know what she said to him, and she just hands him this little note. And my wife and I are just watching like, what is she doing, man? And so all of a sudden she came up and we were like, baby, what are you doing? And she's like, well, Dad. And she looked down and she had an entire notebook full of just encouragement notes for homeless people. She said, Dad, if we don't have money, we got to get them we have to give them something. So I had a journal. And so I just decided to just write them. I don't want them to know that they're loved. And I want them to know that God cares about them. My wife and I are like crying, just going, what in the world? How is a 6-year-old teaching us deeply what the way we should be, just open-handed? Here's the thing. Do you have a prayer to give? Give it. Do you have presents to give? Give it. Do you have silver and gold sometimes in your pocket? Give it. Like whatever it takes, we're the kinds of people that give what we have. Verse 7, I love this. It says, taking him by the right hand, he just helped him up. And instantly, I love this, the man's feet and his ankles, you can almost kind of see it happening in front. They just became strong. And he just jumped to his feet and began to walk. And then he went with them into the temple courts. Can you imagine if you've been lame since birth and now you're walking around, and man, this brother is walking and jumping. The old song is walking and leaping and praising God. Walking and jumping and just praising God. And when all the people saw that guy that they'd been walking past, that they had seen, that they knew had been carried probably since a real young age, they just couldn't help but everybody started praising God, and they recognized him as the same man who used to sit there begging outside the temple gate called Beautiful. And the whole place was filled with wonder and amazement at what had happened to him. I don't know about you, but don't you want to be a part of that? I mean, I just want you to know, as we step into this 6 weeks, that there is a power in living life together, a one another life. The kind of life where we are just devoted, not like if it's convenient, not if I have some spare time, but we are devoted. That's the early church. They were devoted to living life with one another. They were devoted to the we. So I just real fast, because you're gonna have to process this right after this, I just wanna ask you, are you devoted to we? I mean, who do you regularly pray with? Who are you believing with together for something great for God to do? Are you devoted? Are you gonna make it through this 6 weeks, man? Like, are you devoted to really living a one another life? Second of all is we carry people. That's what we do. If we're gonna live this one another life, we're gonna have to carry people. We're gonna have to recognize that sometimes the best thing that we can do is just do what we can do to get them to a place where God can do what only God can do. So my question is, are you carrying people? Are there people's burdens and heartaches? And are you aware of the things that are going around you? And are you doing whatever you can to get them into a place where God can show up? We carry people, we see people. When people run into you, do they walk away with more faith or less? Do you feel like after running into you that they have more eyes for what God can do, a bigger heart for how God wants to show up? We see people past their situations and into the things that God can do. We see the impossible God can do before other people can see it. And then lastly, are you giving what you have? I know so many times we get locked up because you're like, listen, man, like I know there's probably people out there that when they pray, stuff happens, and I want to grow in that, and I kind of want to be this, but I'm just being honest. Maybe your faith isn't to that place yet. But here's what I say, what I want to really encourage you with. But part of the way that we're all going to get there is if we just show up open-handed, committed to one another life, carrying people, seeing people, eyes of faith for people, and you just give what you have today, man. Can you carry them? Carry them. Can you see them? See them. Can you have faith for them beyond their impossible situation, even if you don't even know how God's going to do it? Then have faith for people, but give what you have. There is a power in this one another way of life. And you were not made to be all alone. You were made to be Allelon with one another.